Welcome to Repeat That Again, please. Today's conversation is one that I'm really looking forward to having because I think workplace and workplace culture is so fundamental to so many people's lives because so many people have to go to work. And the way that their work is, the way it operates, can often really dictate a lot of how people are feeling outside of work. And so, workplace culture, business culture is something that I think could be improved. I think it could be better, not just for individuals, but when individuals feel better and supported in the workplace, they're better workers, they're more productive, they want to come to work, they want to show up for their company. And I think this is a trick that so many organizations are missing by not really deep diving into their culture. Is it working? Who is it working for? Who is it not working for? Talent management, one of my big things that I think workplaces really seem to struggle with. We covered middle management, we talked about IVF, we talked about children, we talked about parents versus non-parents, the culture wars we see on LinkedIn, even around things like HR. What is their function and what are they doing so they can be trusted by more workers rather than feeling like they're just there to protect the company? It was a wide-ranging conversation, and that's because I'm talking to the amazing Charlotte Speak, and she is from Power of the Parent. Now, Charlotte set up Power of the Parent in 2018 after her own experience of becoming a parent in the workplace did not go the way that she wanted. And those experiences changed her and made her sure that she would change the world of work for parents as well as those with caring responsibilities. And the thing about Charlotte that is amazing is that Charlotte understands if you change this for parents and for people with caring responsibilities, it makes it a better workplace for everyone. She has so much context and nuance that is not a them v us, but how can we make the workplace better for everyone? So she was mainly working with companies on parents returning to work. But now she's actually taken a bit of a different route, one which I think is so interesting. Rather than deal with the symptom of the problem, let's go further upstream and see what we can do with the policies, with companies who want to attract, retain, and develop their team members who are parents or who have caring responsibilities. She does strategies with a practical edge. She leaves organizations and valued team members empowered and able to feel that they can thrive in their workplace. So Charlotte Speak, parental support consultant and coach, a mum of two, devourer of books, avid theme park explorer, and someone that I just in general love talking to about life, work, and everything in between. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Hello, Charlotte. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Hello, Charlotte. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So we're going to just dive straight into the questions. And, you know, what you do is amazing.
Thank
around
you.
workplace strategy and around talent and really and how you got there. I always find that absolutely fascinating. But I'd love to just hear your thoughts on workplace strategy around talent, because I don't think much has changed since the early 2000s in terms of how people manage progression, despite the advancements that we've had in like other areas of like wellness and understanding how people think. We're doing all the psychoanalyzing, but then what are we actually doing with the information? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
I think it's a really interesting question, and I suspect probably you'd get different answers depending on industry, and then even more detail depending on different organizations. But overall, what I see is we like definitive answers as a human race. We're not great in the subjective or the grey areas unless we're being the keyboard warriors on the internet. But in a workplace context, in a talent conversation, in a how do you judge potential and all that kind of stuff, I think there is a fundamental barrier for a lot of people. And I saw it with a lot of leaders that I worked with in a corporate setting. They were very attracted to a model, a talent model, particularly something like the 9-box, which lots of people will be familiar with. But the premise of a lot of talent management systems and processes is about labeling people and putting them in a box and being very clear about what are we defining here. And we've also gone through decades of very particular definitions of success in the workplace. I know firsthand that I came from a career where your definition of success was to get to a certain level and earn a certain amount of money, ideally by the time you were whatever age. And I think realistically, although we've had some really amazing conversations and we have definitely had some moves forward in the workplace, there is still a legacy there of a lot of that. I don't think it's ever truly gone. And I'm not totally, maybe I'm being a little bit grumpy about it. I'm not sure it will ever 100% go, because there's always somebody that's going to have that definition of success. It might be that we know that as different generations are coming through the workplace, yes, they do have different things that they want to go after and different things that are important to them. But right now, we've still got a lot of generations in the workplace who do believe that it is about experience and that it is kind of wearing certain things as a badge of honor, busyness, hustle and strife and all of that kind of stuff. We love a framework. We love instructions. We love, can I go down and assess somebody? And can I say, yes, they tick this box, but they don't tick that box? Is there a clear-cut answer? There's almost like a safety in that. And I can justify my answers. I can justify why I'm putting somebody over here or over there. I also know that there are some amazing organizations out there and talent consultancies and lots of business leaders who are actively trying to shake a lot of that off. They really do understand the power of conversation and understanding people's unique strengths and abilities that they bring to the workplace. So I think we have still got an infrastructure of give me a model, give me a framework, let me be able to answer something definitively. It's the same with policies. It's that nervousness of having a more creative conversation and really embracing what somebody's saying. What are some of the differences that people can bring? I don't say any of this flippantly and like it would be an easy thing to unpick. I think it feels like it should be simple to have better quality conversations. That doesn't always translate to easy. So I don't say it because I think we should all be doing it and we can all do it quickly. But I definitely think there is some scope to really get curious about how do we have talent conversations and how do we make sure that everybody, regardless of your life setup, is able to thrive.
And it's so interesting, isn't it? Because I often think, and I always go back to golf, but they have this thing where the women always played on a Tuesday, and that was the way. But then more younger women who worked, and so now they play on Saturday. So now you've got two groups of women who play very different days, but the same competition. And so they tried to make it so, okay, well, you have to pick at the top of the year which day you're going to play, whether you're a Saturday competition or a Tuesday. Then actually that doesn't work because, I might actually be off this Tuesday or it's half term and actually I would want to do that. Or the Saturday it's raining. But then the minute that you don't make that rule, it becomes unfair because then people who could play Tuesday say, oh, well, the weather wasn't very good, so I decided to play Saturday. And it's like this with talent management, isn't it? If you make a system, it can't be fair. People like the system because they feel there's fairness within there, which, as you say, what that actually rewards is time spent on the job, displaying certain criteria rather than actual talent. People know they're working to a checkbox. And if I do this, I'll get promoted, which I actually feel excludes talent. So if someone comes in and they're amazing, what happens? Or they haven't been here long enough, or they don't know the culture. And sometimes those are the actual wins that make this person talent that you should absolutely promote. But it's almost like the system then kicks in, it locks in, the cogs start turning and everyone's like, no, 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 no. And businesses, I think, are actually leaking talent. I don't know. What is that? Is it frighteners? Is it... And the fairness thing comes up a lot. Well, we didn't do that for so-and-so. And I find that so interesting in a business that will probably be about a bottom line in some way, shape or form. Well, if this person's good for the bottom line, it's not about you disregard people who've done long service. Again, this is where I think talent management, oh, sorry, go on, you say it because you're going to explain this better than me. You kind of know what I'm getting at.
Well, I think it is just our inability at times, and I'm kind of making a sweeping statement there, but there is an inability to hold two things being true at the same time with a lot of talent management conversations, I think. And it is almost like we've had drummed into us about fairness and I'm going to say equality. And we've taken both of those things and we've gone so far down the other end of the scale that it's like, whoa, like, hang on a minute. Actually treating everybody exactly the same is not going to deliver for you. That is not the right thing to be doing. I was on a really interesting webinar with some absolutely incredible leaders and thinkers in the diversity, equity and inclusion space. It was fab. And one of them there said, sometimes these kinds of conversations and D&I conversations and practices will go so wrong, and that is why it can get such a bad reputation. And I can see it happening with talent as well. We think that we praise a system that brings consistency, but that's then where we stop. If I know I keep saying the 9 box, but I take that as a model, which I think a lot of people would be familiar with. And if you're not, just Google it, it's out there. It's very much redundant. And there are lots of people that believe that it is now redundant and we can move past it. But I know that there are still people clinging on to, how can we identify which box talent sits in? And how do we identify, right, if you're in this box, that means your career path is then going to look like this. Like, we're talking about humans, not houseplants. It's like the value of the question of where do you want to be in 5 years' time? I think we can all agree that that is out with the arc. Decision makers, influencers, strategy setters, the leaders in the business, who, by the way, come to all of these conversations with their own biases that we've got to be honest about, and say, right, we do need a baseline. We do need to have like a minimum viable product when it comes to talent conversations, because we don't want it to be a total Wild West. But then once you've got that, how do we help leaders understand that there is a fluctuation above that baseline? And that fluctuation looks like a variety of conversations. It looks like playing to people's strengths. It looks like understanding where their career is at any given moment. And that might shift and change, and probably will almost definitely shift and change. What you and I want now from our careers could be very different to 2 years' time. You're not dealing with a fixed state of anybody. And I think sometimes other conversations in the workplace about things like wellness or looking after people can move a little bit quicker, and they can be very thematic as well. There's something that lends itself to an agility with that. So yeah, I think there's a lot to go after.
And it's interesting because I think I'm a talent, but I don't fit within that workplace culture because of this exact thing. It just doesn't work for me. And I remember at one place and I said, I don't think the landscape here is right for me, because here there seems to be a thing that you don't want anyone to be a star. You don't want anyone to shine and to outshine others. And I do a lot of outward facing things that put a spotlight on. So that's always going to be the case. But then if that is needing to be dampened down for me to be here, then that's really tricky for me. And I think this is often why you see a lot of talented people becoming consultants, why you see a lot of talented people ending up working for themselves, because the current talent management system just does not support people actually moving in and out of their zones of genius, which sometimes may look like overreach. Sometimes it will be underreach. Sometimes they will be outward facing, doing a lot of talks and panels. And for some workplace, like, oh no, well, we don't like that. Well, no, this is good for your bottom line. And I do think it is, in the nicest way, a fundamental lack of imagination of actually what the modern system needs, and the kind of innovation and innovative approach to what does your business organizational brand look like outside of the fishbowl. And I always talk about it like fishbowls, because inside the fishbowl, everything is of great importance within the fishbowl. And there's a big fish in the fishbowl that everyone inside the fishbowl is servicing. And outside the fishbowl, no one even knows who that person is. Their name does not exist in any public sphere. But inside, they have great importance. And I think that's why when you see a bright, shiny fish and it's like, oh, no, you don't seem to be servicing the big fish. You don't understand what we're doing in here. They just jump out to another pond. And I wish that more businesses would have better thinking, because diversity is not just about ethnicity, gender. Talent is a part of diversity and inclusion, but I really don't think that people think about it like that.
I think that's probably a very fair observation.
Also, thinking about talent, there's a thing that I think is a big sticking point in a lot of businesses I have identified, and you can tell me whether or not I'm right or wrong. Middle management. Middle managers, we love you. I'm not here to talk down on middle management, but I think that is the level where a lot of talent does leave the business, sometimes under a middle manager who may be the striver, box ticker, but I'm doing everything the right way. You definitely can't come in and overtake me. Also, I think for middle managers, there is a lack of formal training. I think once you ascend that level to C-suite, senior executive, there's a lot more specific training around your development in ways that are more the soft skills, personal development space, not just on the job. But people going into middle management are often undertrained, but they have a huge impact on the culture and talent retention. In your work, how have you seen this impacting your clients, but also the business?
with permission, I would always love to give some of those middle managers a hug if they were huggers, because I think that they can have a really hard time. And I think I probably give them a hard time as well in some respects. I think the impact is huge. So one, the cliche of you join a business but you leave a manager is a cliche for a reason. And I think that that is alive and well. I also talk about something called the line manager lottery. Not necessarily a game that any of us want to be playing, but we often find ourselves in it because you can work for a really incredible leader and then a new role comes up and you've made that move, whether it's sideways, upwards, whatever, and you could find yourself in a very different setup in exactly the same organization, because that is just the reality for a lot of businesses. Whether they're a new line manager or an established one, there will be some people who are very conscious of their gaps, and that makes them very nervous, and they can therefore hold back and they worry about what they can say and what they can't say. In my line of work, that often comes up with people who are preparing to go on any form of parental leave. And a line manager will be like, well, I can't contact them while they're not in the business, can I? And I mustn't make them think that I'm going to get in contact with them while they're not in the business. Should I? And you can kind of see them wanting to ask the question, but being really nervous too. And obviously it's that question has a really vibrant answer. It's quite a rich tapestry of responses that you can give to that. But you can see that person is thinking, I don't want to be the line manager who has been pushing against somebody that they actually just want to switch off and they don't want to stay in contact while they're on parental leave, or there's just an abundance of outcomes there. But we can convince ourselves as a line manager that if I say something, it's going to be the wrong thing. So I'll just say nothing at all. And then actually that's just as damaging, if not more damaging. And then I think there are some who will wing it, and they will be the people who always fly because they've got amazing amounts of empathy and compassion and curiosity, and they can do a brilliant job, but I think they are few and far between. And then there are a group who know they haven't got some of that knowledge or compassion behind them, and they go hell for leather anyway, and they are clumsy about it sometimes, and they really are saying the wrong things, and that I think can be incredibly damaging for everybody. Like, it will dent your confidence as a line manager, because at some point you will be held to account for that, and that is a problem that you end up having to unpick. The quality of training, whatever we call it, I think is often seen as very transactional, and I would really look at how you have designed that training. Has it been done in a collaborative way? When was the last time you asked a line manager, what training do you need? Or are you putting them through a sheep dip? Because I will absolutely be realistic about this. We're all pushed for time. We've got lots of opportunity costs when it comes to investing in things like training. But we have been, again, conditioned to be time pressured, and wearing struggle and strife as a badge of honor. Oh, I can't do that training today. I'm just too busy. Or I've got to do that meeting. That meeting trumps this training. And you're like, oh, but does it? We know that culture eats change for breakfast. It eats anything for breakfast that stands in its way. So there has to be a top down. I'm telling you, as the CEO or as the COO or whoever it might be, I'm going to advocate for why it's important that we look after our people. And that comes in so many different forms. So I think don't let people feel like they just have to know this stuff and therefore they can divert against training. Another conversation that I have with a lot of organizations and individuals is, well, it's okay because they're a parent themselves, so they should know how to support parents in the workplace. And that is just the biggest lie ever told. So maybe not the biggest, definitely up there in my top 10. But that is a problem. That kind of attitude creates a lot of this problem. Like, just give people the support that they're asking for, because whilst it might be a time investment up front, I'm telling you now, it's going to save you a heck of a lot of money in the long term. You will see a reduction in things like, if you've ever got yourself to the stage where you've been in things like legal positions where you're having to dish out cash, you are talking about things like time lost, innovation lost. Like, they are things that we can put a figure to that are costing organisations millions of pounds every year. I think the impact of lack of training it's catastrophic in some cases, and I don't say that lightly, but I also think we're not necessarily asking the right questions about training either.
I think one of the biggest things, and you touched on it, I don't know what to say, so I'll say nothing. And I know I've had people come to me and they're like, I'm line managing this person. Sometimes they're a white person. I just feel I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to upset them. I don't want to offend them. Sometimes they're underperforming. Okay, well, have you given them feedback? Well, I feel a bit nervous of giving them feedback because I don't want to come across as racist. And you hear that writ large about disability, about gender, like, about parents, non-parents, bereavements. A lot of people just don't know what to say, and they have not been given the tools to communicate when they are unsure. And I think it does come down to, I should know. So I think there's people not asking for support sometimes because they feel that asking for support is a sign of weakness and shows they're not ready, and they've been given this trust and they don't know what they're doing, which is absolutely not what it is, but it can feel like that. And especially when it's like, but we're so busy. It's all of those little things that tell you, don't be a problem. Just get on with it. Just tell them that they can't have the bereavement leave. Just tell them they can't have that half-term holiday. But when you're the person in the chair, if you're not comfortable with communicating that, like you say, it can be some people just wrong and strong, very clumsy. They go in like, no, can't happen. And like you say, it's not nice. And sometimes people aren't nice people, but sometimes people are just not equipped people. And actually, there's just no way that they're going to do it. And it's also incumbent on the business, like you say, to recognize the value in equipping them to be able to communicate that in this moment. And I think about parenting, there are single parents, 50 million different shapes of what a family looks like. So to say that you're a parent, they might have a nanny. They might have no idea what it's like for this parent who is by themselves, maybe not enough family around, not enough support. It's just like saying, well, you're both women, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's kind of where the similarities begin and end. What kind of practical steps, like what questions could organizations actually be asking? Because that is something that I guess they'll say, well, where do we even begin to untangle this ball of wool?
I would go to your line managers, go and ask them what it is that they need. That does perhaps happen in some businesses, but I know it is not a wholesale approach. Make sure that you are getting really good quality feedback loops in place, because the amount of times I have been sat in a seat where I haven't done that myself, especially when I was in an organisation where I thought I just had to know and I just had to do it. And if I didn't have every anticipated question or every anticipated answer, you were deemed as a failure. And it is an absolutely horrific, toxic environment to be in. But we can only break those environments by finding our own way of standing up to it. I'm going off on a tangent there, but fundamentally, to answer the question, I would say the quality in how you design and the formats that you use as well. So if you only ever use e-learning or workshops, or maybe you do one-to-one clinics, whatever the format is, you've got to look, I think, and honestly ask yourself, are we supporting people through different formats? I'll use policies as an example because this is probably the most common. The amount of times I have partnered with an organisation who have landed a policy and then they'll say, but nobody's using it, or it's being landed incorrectly. People are going at creative license with it. And then we look back at what the communication plan was, and we look back at the infrastructure that is surrounding these people that are meant to be landing and using these policies. And suddenly all the light bulbs go on, because they might have communicated it once, twice at a push with a reminder. And then we expect people to just get it and just use it. And it can be really clinical and scripted. That's not what people want. They want to understand that they can go and have a conversation. They want to use language that they would actually use when they talk in a conversation. They don't want to read something that is flat to page. And you can stay legal and talk in that way with people. It's okay. Like, the two are not polar opposites. They can go hand in hand. I think there's a lot of assumption about once you've read something, you're going to get it. And if you're a line manager, I should only need to tell you once and you should be able to go do it. And I really, really challenge that, because we are humans at the end of the day, regardless of what our job titles are. So really good quality feedback, and mix up the format of how you're getting the feedback. Really good quality training materials, and mix up the format of what those training materials are. And give yourself the time. I think we definitely live in a world, and I've said this to you so many times before, but we live in a world that adores a silver bullet and a quick checklist, and this is going to see you right in the next 5 days kind of mentality. And that is just not the reality at all. So let's start to embrace that and know that okay, we might not see a change in the next 6 months. It actually might take 18 months, but that's okay, because it's better to do that and get started and know that we're on the right path, that you will get that payback, that return on investment in spades, if you give it the space that it deserves to be embedded or to be used, whatever it might be.
And I think it is, we don't give things the time. So we do launch day and we think it's like a rocket that now is in space. And if we acknowledge that people are messy and complex, and that any given time the training you give might have come at the worst week of their life, or a week when their head's somewhere else, and so they weren't really taking it in, and there's no other kind of check back in to see, okay, well, have you used it? How's it going? There's no kind of anything. It's like a launch day mentality. I do think it is about, like you say, it's about staying the course and about being invested. I think it's always really interesting because really senior management, they kind of helicopter in at issues at certain check-in points, like quarterly meetings, which is what they have time to do because obviously they've got a bigger picture to explore. But then what that means for the person on the ground with the team, that they need to motivate to do the thing that their senior leadership has tasked them to do, are often left floundering, which is why often the pressure just travels down. They just push that pressure onto their team because they actually don't have another way. They don't have the skills, don't have the tools. And I think in terms of thinking about, workplace cultures, which I think is, as we're talking about it, is very much about how can we just get everyone to slip in the stream and just swim. Because that obviously makes life much easier. I've been a leader. It is much easier when people just understand and just do what you ask. But very rarely does that actually happen. What do we think about, because you work with parents, power of the parent, and also now work with strategically addressing those issues from the next level, which I think is hugely important. How do we begin to think about employees who don't actually fit into the dominant workplace culture? They are not able, for whatever reason, just to slip into stream. And that could be caregiving, life stage, personal circumstances. We've kind of said, talk to your line manager, but really, how can those people advocate for themselves in a way that can be received? Because I think sometimes you talk to your line manager, they blow you off. Why don't we do it in our next one-to-one? It's just like 2 weeks. How can people actually advocate for themselves in a way that doesn't feel pushy, but does push against that sometimes closed door?
This is something that I feel really quite passionate about, and like we don't always give the background of a conversation. You'll see quotes on social media that are like, nobody's got your back like you have. I've said it myself. That is true to an extent, but I think we've got to really dig under, how do we build that for us? So personally, I would start by really owning your definition of success. So if you're going into a conversation and advocating for yourself, you could even ask yourself, on a scale of 1 to 10, how comfortable do I feel talking about myself right now? Like, where am I on my own advocacy scale? I think if you're anything less than, I'm going to be bold, and I'm going to say an 8, which I know might sound really high for some people, but I do think that your mentality, your relationship with your own narrative is really, really important. And you've got to push yourself up that scale, because if you think about how many things fly at you on a day-to-day basis that will not knock you down from being at that 8 and stop that conversation happening. Maybe for some people a 7 would be enough, but I think personally for me, if I'm not at an 8, I'll talk about myself with that and maybe not project it onto other people, but I reckon definitely north of a 7. But really understanding what your definition of success is and owning what that feels like is probably a really big step for a lot of us. I work with a lot of clients who they have grown up in organizations where their now personal definition of success and the corporate definition of success can feel like there's a real incongruence there. So to then say, okay, well, now go speak with your line manager, go advocate for what you want. It's like, what are you talking about? How on earth do I connect those two things up? But I do think it starts with a foundational conversation with yourself, or maybe it's a trusted peer or mentor or somebody at home or whoever you feel like you can. It could be yourself in the mirror. Like, I have a client who, she loves voice noting herself because she's a very auditory learner, and to hear her own words back is really powerful for her. I also have clients that would be their absolute nightmare. They don't ever want to listen to themselves back. Find the thing that works for you to play back your own words, almost become your own coach, and describe that in as much delicious detail as you possibly can. What makes you happy? What does success mean to you? Talk about things like your ideal week setup, month setup, and paint that picture for yourself, because what you're trying to do with an exercise like that is bring to life what is in your head. So it doesn't just become, oh, it's in the back of my mind. You actually are trying to bring it to life. It's like, play it forward. Let's see, what does that look like in reality? So that you start to get really confident about describing that. And I know confidence is a massive word, isn't it? But I think that's what we're trying to build up. I also think, if you don't feel like you can self-advocate for yourself now or at any point, is there somebody that isn't your line manager that you are close to that you could confide in? So they would be, a bit more of a sponsor maybe, and probably somebody that's a peer to your line manager. You could have a conversation with them and understand, what could their role as a bit of an advocate for you, what could that look like? Because we don't always have 100% to give. On the days where we are feeling depleted, but we know we need to still show a good front and advocate for ourselves, what might that network of support look like? And it doesn't have to be a massive network. It doesn't have to be 10 different people who play 10 different roles for you. It could just be one person that is your go-to, that is there to help when you're feeling low and down. And in turn, you might then do that for somebody else one day as well. And generally, I do think there are some people out there that are really not nice people, let's be honest. But there are also, for every one of them, I think that there must be at least 10 people who want to help. Like, they want to see people succeed. And the trick is going to be, don't go and seek out the person who's going to make you feel crap. You want to go find those other 10 people who are going to help you. The other thing that I would also do is look at your strengths. So I don't mean skills and competencies. I mean things that energize you, that you love doing, that light you up. And that is what we want to focus on, because advocating for yourself, when you feel good, when your energy is higher, when you are connected with what you're doing, when you're living in a way that is aligned to your personal values, which your strengths will be, that's where the magic happens. That's the stuff that helps pick you up. And it doesn't mean that every day is perfect or that we live every single day according to our strengths. I am a strengths practitioner and I certainly don't do that, but I try and do it more days than not. And even if I manage just an hour of playing to my strengths and the rest of the day is I'm in survival mode and I've got to get through, the point that we're looking for are those moments of magic that are going to help us push forward. So I think they would be my 3 kind of practical things to consider. First of all, start with your definition of success. What does that look like? Get really up close and personal with it. And I do often say common sense isn't always common practice. So you might think you know what your definition of success is, but do you really? Do you definitely? Look at who is in your support network, which might sound counterintuitive when we're talking about self-advocacy, but I definitely think don't feel like you've got to do some of it alone. And strengths, not necessarily in that order, but that they would be the things that I would practically suggest to do.
Because it's always been interesting whenever I've led teams, I just like to get on with stuff. And so for me, leading a team is like slowing me down from like achieving. I'm like more of an individual contributor. But the thing what I've always found interesting, when people come to you, they want something, but they don't really know what they want. They just want something more. Well, you're going to have to break down to me what that more is, because I'm not a psychic. I know what I would like you to do more of, which is probably not what you want to do more of. So when you come to me, like you say, you have to have a clear idea of, well, this is where I'm actually trying to get to in my career, or this is the kind of role I'd like to do. And by sounding that out with other people, it makes sense now to the person you're speaking to, because sometimes people come to me, it doesn't make any sense. So if you're not clear, I'm not clear. Now I feel like you've wasted my time because you've asked for a meeting for which you are not prepared yourself. You're not lit up. You're not excited even about the things that you're kind of asking me about. So I'm kind of like, what is it that you want from me? And I think this is the piece around communication that I think so many people don't understand, is like, when you are unclear, people can't help you, or they'll project what they want you to do onto you, and you'll end up doing more of their dream than your dream, which means you come away kind of like, how did I go in there wanting this and I've come out bamboozled with like 5 more responsibilities and no more money? And I think that's sometimes how these conversations go, depending on the kind of leader that you have. And I think it's also just to acknowledge that some people love managing. Some people love that coaching stuff. So they love it. They'll get in the weeds with you. And there are some managers like me who are like, you tell me what you want and I will do my very best to facilitate that for you. but I'm probably not going to get in the weeds with you about exactly what that is. Now, I have actual mentees, and actually they do get that from me, but that's because I'm mentoring them. But if I'm managing you, it's a whole different dynamic, because actually I've got a thing that I need to happen. You're the person to execute that thing, and I'm trying to make you just execute it at the end of the day. And I think another thing, I mean, this wasn't on my list of questions, but I also find this really interesting when people talk about the difference between a leader and a manager. I've got to say, not nonsense in the definitions, but I think it's nonsense, because sometimes you have to manage people. Sorry, if you're running a business, you can't just be inspirationally coaching from the side. No, you need stuff to be done. I'd love to hear your take on this, because I see it all the time and I find it a bit like, oh, come on, guys. Surely, again, both things can be true, no?
Yeah, it probably falls into one of my categories of why are we trying to label something that just doesn't necessarily require a label? And we get really then caught up in, well, I'm this. I think some of that narrative is incredibly unhelpful. And actually what we would be better spending our time doing is who we are and what we can bring to a conversation. Just like you've described, look, I can do this when I am a manager or a leader or whatever the hell you want to call me. This is the mode that I'm operating in. This is how I lead. This is how I work. I've got somebody in my team who actually, when they're in the weeds, they're not going to respond well to that. Now, I, as that leader, need to know that they like to be managed in a different way. Or if they're having a development conversation, my way is not going to be very well received. And likewise, I'm not going to receive them very well. So the best thing and the kindest thing that I can do right now is match them up with one of my peers who actually is fantastic at that stuff, and could have a coffee with them for an hour and probably get to the crux of what is going on. And then part two is this person and I will have that conversation. So it's not, nobody needs to say, I'm this and I'm not that, and therefore I'm never going to be that. It's like, let's just look at the process slightly differently, as opposed to there's one right way to do it. And that's the thing I think sometimes with the, am I a leader? Am I a line manager? I think ask ourselves, what does that look like in reality? I think it comes down to people who just want to talk about hierarchy, and it becomes like this contest of, well, how high am I? I can put leader in my title now.
Managers aren't empathetic, but leaders are. And it's like, that is nonsense. Like, to me, it's nonsense. Sometimes you have to lead. Sometimes you're doing big vision setting piece as a leader. And it's like, well, this is where I see us in like a year's time. This is where I'd love the team to be. That's leadership. And then now we have to do it. So now I need to manage the process of this vision, this that we're all excited about and starry-eyed. To make that happen, we can't stay starry-eyed. Now we have to do the work. Same with micromanaging. I'm sorry, I have managed some people who they need to be managed in the micro because they don't do anything, or they won't, or they can't work. I've inherited teams before, and when you inherit teams, you inherit people, and I wouldn't have hired them because I don't think they can actually do the job. I remember running a TV channel, and one of the producers had never done a storyboard. Now, for me, this is like, how did you get this job when you've never done a storyboard? Never. So yeah, I micromanaged that process of that particular show of teaching her how to do a storyboard, because there was no time to send her out on a course, because I need this now. And sometimes I've been micromanaged in my job. And yes, sometimes people are micromanager control freaks. They will always be among us. They're never leaving. That's why they're drawn to management. But we have become very absolutist in the workplace, that this means this or this means that, and every micromanager is a bad person. I have seen people micromanage people who did need it. And I've seen people learn from the experience of being managed in the micro, of the way that something should be done. And I've equally seen managers who just can't let go. And it doesn't need to be micromanaged. You don't need to tone police their emails. Just because someone's not doing it the way you think it should be done, that doesn't mean it's wrong. How do we break this? It's a big question, but how do you in your work encourage organizations to break free of this kind of thinking that I think is just so restrictive?
I think the first thing, and I often say this quite bluntly to people, the first thing is not trying to hide some of it. So it's like the people who want to be perfect, who want to pretend like there's nothing wrong, will try and mask some of it. And I think that is wildly unhelpful. And actually just sometimes calling out like, this is a problem and we therefore need to get to the bottom of it, is something that we need to be focusing on. If you take let's take that micromanaging example. There is a difference between the example that you gave there of like somebody just fundamentally didn't have the skills, or if you were managing somebody who fundamentally isn't performing, and therefore they need a different kind of support and leadership and management to help them deliver and set them up for success, not failure. That is wildly different to a line manager who cannot stand back, who is tone policing people's emails or telling you, this is how you do it, and I'm going to be in this nitty gritty, and you're going to do it how I tell you to do it. They are two different people. They are two different things. But we often conflate everything together and go, right, well, that's micromanagement. Or people do it with imposter syndrome. Like, I know we're not going to talk about that, but that's like that is a whole thing for me. It's right, let's just bundle everything together rather than, and I know that I'm pretty sure I shared this with you, this quote that somebody shared with me last year that has become my whole personality, a Desmond Tutu quote that says, at some point you have to stop pulling people out of the river. You have to go upstream and find out why they're falling in. That, I think, is what I'm seeing it playing out in life everywhere now that I've heard it once. But that, I think, is the crux of it. That is how we have to break some of this, because sticking plasters do not work. They certainly don't work long term. So you might get a very immediate response to something and you might celebrate and think, yeah, this is great. But then if you fast forward, sometimes only a matter of weeks, the reality has crumbled and gone back to whatever the problem was in the first place. I think really I think it is about courage. I think it is about really good quality conversations and really clear communication, which I know that I know you'll be a fan of, but really isn't complex. I don't think it's definitely not simplistic. I think being curious, having better quality conversations, having psychologically safe workplaces is incredibly important. And I know that that's a massive buzzword, and we are definitely at risk of it being overused, or certainly being used in the wrong context. But the reality is every team has a level of psychological safety. It's not that you don't have it. You will have it. It just, there's a scale. So it just might be down the bottom end of the scale so far low that it feels like you don't have it. Okay, how do we move up that scale? How do we make sure that we've got an organisation where people can speak out in a considered way? You know, when people say things like, I couldn't care less, or I just don't want to give her whatever. I have an issue with that, because I think it isn't necessarily about flippancy and kind of ripping up the pages and going, yeah, whatever. I think it's more about caring better, and how can we make sure that we have better quality conversations, as opposed to saying, well, I'm just going to say that because this is what I believe, and therefore I'm just going to say it. Actually, that's not always helpful. And can we just make sure that there's a bit of, consideration there? And that doesn't absolve anybody of an issue. It doesn't mean that it makes everything all right. But the amount of people that spend time and energy hiding problems is a problem in itself.
The psychological safety thing I find interesting, because I guess I fundamentally don't believe you can have that in a workplace, because there's not always the quality of relationship which I think you need to have psychological safety. What do we mean when we say psychologically safe? Because I think when a lot of people hear psychologically safe, what they feel is soft landing, enjoyable, feeling comfortable. And actually, I don't think that's what psychological safety actually is, but I think that's what's become to be understood. So when someone says, well, I felt unsafe because they criticized me, often people think that psychological safety is the absence of critique, and it is the absence of discomfort. Maybe it's the term that we've overused in a way, like narcissist, like triggered, like every other term that we take and we hammer it to death till it actually means nothing, like imposter syndrome. What it becomes to mean is not what it means.
Yes.
Woke, another word. What we understand that as now is not what it was in its intended purpose. Those two things can be true. So if your personal goal is actually, I want to feel comforted, I want to feel supported, but you work in a private equity business, your comfort will be disregarded if we need to get something done by 6 o'clock tomorrow and everyone is staying all night with the pizza till we get it done. That is counter to the thing that you say that you want from life, you want from your job. And I think psychological safety is one of the things, and I think we need to understand it in a way. It's more of a rigor. It's more of a way of ensuring that we're not damaging people rather than we're making them feel good.
Yes.
But I think people think that's what psychological safety means in the workplace. That we're all going to feel nice and we're going to get on and we're going to be like a family. Don't get me started on that. You are not a family.
Yes.
Families are dysfunctional.
And it's definitely not the case for lots of us, is it? But families come with things like unconditional love and a safety that is definitely not what we're meant to be seeking out in the workplace. It does come down to what people understand concepts to be. There would be a red flag for me for an organisation that describes themselves as a family. That's just it.
Run for the hills, everybody.
Yeah. I can understand if I try and, take a step back. Can I understand why people use that language? Yes, I can. But I think when you look at what it actually means, we shouldn't be using that. So I would never be somebody that I would never ever want to work for. It's an organisation I'd love to chat to and understand, well, what do you mean by that though? And actually, is there a better way of describing it? Because if what you're trying to describe is we want people to feel comfortable, but we also do challenge. We want people to nobody's going to be in charge of your happiness, but we do want you to feel whatever like that's great, but don't tell me that I'm part of a family, because I don't necessarily want to spend a heap of time with my own family anyway.
Someone said, well, you see, Genelle, they see you as like their work mum. I was like, I'm nobody's mother. I come to work because I'm passionate about the work and I want to get things done. But if you're asking me to be like someone's mum here, that's not me. Like it's just fundamentally not what I've come to work to do. As I'm talking about parents, which takes me nicely on, we've spoken about this quite a bit, the unspoken divide between parents and non-parents in the workplace. And this comes down to policies, and how can companies create policies that fairly address the needs of both groups? Because I think what it often feels like, it's like a top trumps game. If you have a child, August is your time. And if you don't have a child, why on earth would you be trying to take leave in August when you don't have a kid? So why don't you just go another time when everyone else who's got kids isn't going? And I think it comes down to this really tricky, sticky situation and sticky conversation that we haven't had in a good quality way in society writ large about, especially the way the world works now, where it's not expected that women are going to have children, or men actually are going to have children in the same way it was. If you say now, no, I don't want to have children, yes, some people might still be like, oh, okay. But it is generally more accepted. So having children, I think for a lot of people now, is seen as a lifestyle choice. So you're choosing a lifestyle of parenting, or you're choosing a lifestyle of non-parenting. And then, of course, the really sticky wicket is those who are child-free, not by choice, which is, I think, another really tricky element that we don't talk about enough. So when we're talking about, well, why can't you go anytime to someone who really would love to have a child, that is like a dagger in their hearts, I'm sure. I am child-free by choice. And so there's a part of me that's kind of, I'm not bothered actually about August. I think it's very expensive. Actually, I do want to go on holiday where there aren't screaming children. Personally, that's my choice, because that's why I've chosen the life I've chosen. But I have a family who have children. And if we go on a family holiday, I have to go when they go, which is term time. I know we've talked about it, but what are the policies that you think hinder us understanding each other more, and what would help us to understand each other more?
I think the biggest hindrance is being so blunt about putting people into groups and then treating those groups like a monolith. So I think the language which we use around policies, they have a lot of potential to cause damage. And that is the biggest part of the problem. Where I stand on a lot of these things, especially some of those holiday conversations, drives me wild that people will have the audacity to put up clickbait things. If you're a parent, you should have first refusal on booking holidays over the month of August. Like, there's so much nuance that sits behind that. It is wild to me that we are still in 2025 and people get away with that kind of level of conversation. I understand it on lots and lots of different levels, but doing that kind of very broad brush, very blunt, this is what I think it should be, I think causes so much outrage and everybody gets cross. There's a lot of hot noise and very, very little moves forward. I think we are fundamentally asking the wrong questions a lot of the time. I think from a policy perspective, one of the things that really does us dirty is when we do badge certain forms of support or intervention as being a parent-only issue. And that is just not the case for a lot of things. Of course, there are going to be certain things that are going to be very specific to a group of people. So if we take fertility treatment, for example, you're not talking to everybody there, and that deserves very specialist wording. It is a very particular time in somebody's life. Actually, thousands of different reasons why you might want to work flexibly. And yes, for some people, that might come down to childcare responsibilities. But I can assure you, nobody is having a jolly when they are going and having to pick their child up. The wraparound care is not available, or that nursery's shutting because they've got to do a deep clean because they've had an outbreak of whatever they've had an outbreak of. And it is often like an anger or a race to the bottom to be like, well, I don't get that. Happens even within the groups. There are a contingent of parents who are perhaps older parents, or they have got grown up children now, or even grandparents, where people will say, well, I never had that support in my day, so why do they get that now? And you're like, oh my gosh, like I just need to put my head in my hands for a second. And I can't even, I often have to remind myself not to argue with strangers on the internet. And that, I think, is what it comes down to. Like, let's have a really honest conversation with ourselves, particularly in the world of work. What have we got here that we have made a parent only issue? How do we unpick some of the PR of that? Because that is causing the divide. And no group is more special than the other. And just because you give one particular person some support doesn't mean that that directly takes from somebody else's pot. I'm yet to find where that actually happens. I do find where people believe that, and they think, well, if you've helped them, then that means I'm not going to get when I need the help. I really don't think that. I don't think I'm being rose tinted about that. I just think that we have a fear, we have a visceral reaction to certain people getting help or support. And we don't ever take a breath and go, actually, I'd probably get that level of help if I asked for it. Okay, I might not be asking for childcare reasons. I might be asking for something else, but why am I assuming somebody's going to say no to me? And where is this coming from, as opposed to what's the reality here? We spend so much of our time in our heads, getting ourselves worked up, why it's going to be a problem. Just have the damn conversation and then deal with it. Then if it's a problem, absolutely, get me on the phone. Actually going into it and understanding the reality is very, very different to what we actually play out in our minds.
And I think it is the assumptions, and it kind of comes back down to the same talent management issue. We're not having the right conversations, probably not asking the right questions. We're lumping people into these pre-designed parent needs August off, not parent doesn't need August off, not parent doesn't understand about the school run. Where are they at 3:00? Why aren't they? Oh, she's definitely going to be gone at 2:30 because she has kids. Like, it's all of these, which fundamentally comes from not understanding the lifestyle of the other also. Because I think there's also a lot of things about single life that is also tricky and challenging and struggling with, all the bills are yours, and there's so many different things about different facets of life that make life tricky, whatever you've chosen to do. And I talk about this in every podcast. Where's the compassion and where's the challenge? So yes, there needs to be challenge here. We need to challenge some narratives. I remember once my manager saying to me, oh, but you see, because he's got a family and they're far away. So it was around Christmas and he'd had the last Christmas off, and then I was working the last Christmas and I'm working this Christmas. I said, well, I don't think that's very fair. My family love me too. I know that they're not far away, but my family love me. They want to spend Christmas with me. And I think, again, it's kind of thing where we feel like we have to help one person. And it's just an unedifying conversation because it's different people have different needs. How can we understand them? And yeah, for some people, actually, do you need to go on holiday in August, bearing in mind that you don't have kids? Do you really want to go on holiday with all the kids? Where are you going? Like, it's cheaper if you just go in June, all those things can be true, but it's how, like you say, it's the PR and the marketing of it, which I think is very bad. And I see some posts on Instagram a lot, and I don't comment because, like you say, I'm not here to argue with strangers on the internet or anywhere else in general. And people have been like, well, my children one day will be looking after you when you're older. And I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. First of all, it's going to be the robots. That's the first thing. But second of all, that is such an unhelpful viewpoint, as is, well, you decided to have children, so that's your choice. These are like very unhelpful viewpoints. And whilst I'm not saying people don't think them in their heads, also think about whether or not it should come out your mouth or across your keyboard. Think about that friend of yours who is single or who does have children, is struggling in front of you right now. Would you be saying those words to them? And if you wouldn't, it's probably not fit for LinkedIn or anywhere else, because this is kind of the next topic is, IVF, baby loss, fertility treatments. These are also very real things that people are going through at work. I know several people who've gone through IVF, some successfully, some not. Every cycle is a heart wrench, and they're going to work and they're hearing this discourse. Well, I've got, and go.
I think we borrow people from their lives in the world of work. They are not our property as an employer. And I think there are some amazing employers out there who do an absolutely awesome job, and they are a variety of sizes in a variety of industries, and they do some really, really incredible stuff. I do not think employers are the enemy of any of this topic, but I do think some of them need to be a lot more honest about where their shortcomings are. I think you can do that in a really productive way, and you do not have to feel defensive. I think there are some people who get very angry at employers, and sometimes rightly so, but we've also got to go hand in hand with some solutions. If we think we've got an idea or a solution, like, let's talk about it, let's bring it, because that's what's going to help us move forward, not like, let me bash my keys. Some people, that's quite enough internet today for you type approach. Things like, the topics that you've just described there, they are still topics that are often very hidden and very personal views about if they even want to talk about it. So I think one of the worst things we can do right now is take topics like IVF, fertility more broadly, or baby loss or miscarriage, and go, right, they're all topics that we've got to talk more about in the workplace. Everybody talk about it. Like, that's not what we're trying to do. But to create a space where if people either want to share their story, or if they want to say, I've never been through any of that, but if I can help, or if you just want to sit and have a cry with me, or if you want to sit and have a bit of joy with me, or if you want to sit and not talk about any of that, you don't have to bring that to work. You don't have to do anything. You don't owe anybody your story, but know that we understand that there is a nuance here. First of all, we will put our money where our mouth is, and we will have a policy that is going to support you through those times, I think is really important. It sends a very strong message. And I did some work last year with an organisation on some content to do with fertility treatment. And there is a very, very murky side to fertility treatment. If you need to go through clinics, if you can't afford to go through clinics, and there are lots of stories, believe me, there is a side to that world that is not shared openly that I think people would be like, oh, okay, I did not know that happened, or really, that's a thing. So the same goes with things like miscarriage and the experiences of going through baby loss. We know the surface of it. And even if you've been through it yourselves, you know your story, and probably some on top of that. But again, there is a danger in treating people exactly the same because they've been through a shared experience. So amazing things that you can do as an organisation. Policies go a really long way in terms of the message it sends. But they're not going to save you. They're not going to save you from crap leadership or line management, whatever we want to call it today. They're not going to save you from dodgy culture, but they can provide a baseline that says we are an employer who understands people have different life setups. There are different routes to parenthood. If you A, choose to become a parent, or B, you don't get that choice, and you're having to navigate that and what all the things that might come with it. But I think, just letting people know that their boundaries are their boundaries. You can do what you can as an employer. But I think combine all of that together, we could do so much good.
When I lost my baby, I was 19, I was quite young, and I was working in an insurance company at the time. And there was about 3 other people pregnant at the same time as me. And, I remember going back to work, and this was 20 odd years ago. So it was very different to the way there was no policy. They didn't know what to do. It was just so unexpected. And there was no ongoing maternity pay. The world is a very, 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 very different world. But I know for some people, they still step back into that world and they feel like, okay, well, I'm back to work now, so I need to be back. Or I've just come from my IVF treatment. I've just found out the cycle's not worked. I have to come back to work, because there's no policy for that. Like, how do I take time off for something that didn't actually happen? Because it didn't happen. So there's nothing for me to take time off over. It's been something big that has happened in me, and I need some time to come to terms with it. So I do think, like you say, there is a space, I think, for organizations to become more thoughtful, and not just for mums, but also for other parents as well in these conversations, because it's not just women affected by these issues. And I think we also need to understand that, as we understand parental leave is about parents. We're not gendering that. And finally, my last kind of question, which is probably a bit of a big question. I've seen a lot of posts on LinkedIn again recently. LinkedIn's really providing a lot of content at the moment. I'm not going to say whether I think it's good or bad, it's providing content. But some HR professionals feeling quite aggrieved that a lot of people seem to think HR is there for the employer and not for them. And I think a lot of people do actually feel like that. I know I've definitely felt like that HR is there to protect the company, and the employee, their whole job is to kind of firefight you and build a firewall around the company and keep you out or from blowing up everything. What are a couple of things you've seen, because you work with HRs as well as ERG groups, so you're kind of seeing the both sides of the fight, so to speak. What needs to change to make HR feel like a more neutral and trusted resource, and actually the human in the resource, or the people team as they're now called? But it doesn't matter what you brand it. If the culture doesn't change, it doesn't actually matter what you call it. People will have the same feeling. What are some things you've seen HR do that you think, oh, you could tweak that and it wouldn't change anything for you, but it would maybe change the dynamic?
I think they often, as a function, I can totally see why they get the branding that they do. I think if we flip it on its head and say, why isn't some of this a whole company conversation? Why is some of this stuff only falling to HR? I think actually is a problem. And I often find that HR are stepping in to do the jobs of line managers. And that can be because sometimes they just can't help themselves and they think it should be us that's doing it. And then other times it's because line managers, there's a gap there. So I think a bigger question would be, what is the relationship with the rest of the organisation? And how do we take these conversations that historically HR have been the custodian of, and they still will be the custodian of things like policies and strategies that are related to people, because they are an expert in a lot of that stuff. And you have got people that you are wanting to bring into the conversation because they do know their stuff. But they, like any function, there has to be a part where somebody else picks up where they leave off. So I think fundamentally being honest again about where is the seat at the table. So if you do feel like they're there to protect the company, what is the behavior that you're seeing that is causing that? Like, let's get curious about where that branding has come from, and let's understand from different perspectives and viewpoints. And it's not about let's argue about it and let's have a discussion and try and change everybody's mind. But have you ever had an open and honest conversation about why that might be and where that is coming from, is what I would be saying.
And I think that is so, so important. And I think sometimes HR jumping in just makes everything more formal, everything, which is a bit of a problem. Final question. What's an area of compassion and challenge for organisations, given in mind all that we've discussed? And I think this probably is targeted at organisations really, and the people that run them. What's an area of compassion in like looking at all of these things from training line managers to talent management? And what's an area of challenge that you would like to give?
An area of challenge I would like to give is I would love to challenge employers to think about not going for the quick fixes because it looks good and because you think I'm going to get an immediate result and that'll be great, because I think that then has repercussions in several different directions. And an area of compassion I would like to give is to focus on your strengths. So what are your organizational strengths? Because it's a brutal world out there. It's very noisy. I would really love you to show yourself some self-compassion as an organization and understand what are you doing well, because the things will be there. Even in the crustiest of corners, there will be some good. And what can you take from that? What can you learn from your organizational strength?
Amazing. We don't need beanbags, more foosballs, tables. We don't need any more kind of, why don't we have a drink at 11? Not going to fix the problems here, people. Not going to fix the problems at all. Thank you so much for joining me. It was an interesting, wide-ranging conversation, just as I hoped it would be. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I've loved it.
Thank you for listening to that interview with Charlotte. I think we touched on so many interesting topics about how do we, I think we need to reimagine the way workplaces work for people and really take into consideration, and I loved what she said, that we borrow people from their lives. They don't belong to the company, they belong to themselves, and we borrow them. And actually, if we're borrowing them, how do we look after them well? Not just for them, but so they can be productive and work. When people are happy, they work better. We come up with better solutions. We feel included. We feel like we want to contribute to our company. We feel more loyal, all of those things. So it was a really, really interesting conversation. And you can find out more about Charlotte's work. You can connect with her. Head off to the show notes. You'll see the links in there to connect with her, message her. She is a brilliant strategist. And if your organization is looking for someone to come in and think about some of these quite gnarly topics with quality conversations and a lot of compassion, nuance, and context, I would definitely recommend getting in touch with Charlotte. Thank you so much for listening. To repeat that again, please. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share if you found this interesting, and also to let me know what you think about what we talked about. Are there other angles of this that we didn't explore that you would like to hear? I'm always open, so please do let me know. So thanks again for listening. I really appreciate every single one of you, and I will see you next